Hi, I'm Jeff Westfall, and this is a series on the trapping dummy that is going to run in parallel with my series called Trapping Dummy for Dummies, which is intended more for folks who have not trained on a dummy before. This is more for those of you who have, or maybe you're really experienced at trapping but are new to the dummy, but you understand a lot of the terminology and techniques. Before I get into it, I want to tell you a few things. We'll get more into techniques starting in the next video. First, I'm an instructor under Dan No Santo in Gongfu. That's the system that Bruce Lee and Dan No Santo put together that is confused a lot with Jeet Kune Do. Jeet Kune Do is actually, in our opinion, Bruce Lee's martial philosophy, not a system with punches and kicks that are Jeet Kune Do and punches and kicks that are not Jeet Kune Do. So the curriculum that was being taught by Sifu No Santo, who's my teacher, at the Chinatown gym that Bruce Lee owned in 1973 when Bruce Lee passed away, that curriculum is called Zhongfang Gongfu. Now, Bruce Lee did not learn all 108 movements on the Wooden Man, the traditional Wing Chun 10 sets, before he was put on a boat and sent to the United States by his dad. He had actually only learned 6 and part of 7. 1 through 6 and part of 7 of the 10 sets. He then, once he moved to the United States, quickly got himself a dummy and continued to train and actually began to improvise quite a bit as his understanding grew and he gained insight. He really used the dummy not just to do the traditional sequences and some of the more basic drills, but he improvised a lot and came up with a lot of things on his own. Sifu No Santo, back in those days, used to hang out with him and watch him train, maybe train with him together, but especially watch what he was doing and pepper him with questions. Sifu Bruce, why are you doing that? That's not in one of the original sets. I'm sure he made a pest of himself. Sifu No Santo is an educator. He was a middle school teacher, and he's a genius of organization. Sifu Bruce was more his genius lay in another area, coming up with inspired ideas, but not necessarily figuring out how to organize them for passing them on. That was for other individuals to do. And Guru No Santo, or Sifu No Santo, was happy to fill that role. So one thing he did was, through his years and from his years of watching Sifu Bruce training on the dummy, doing things that were not just in the original Zhongfang sets, as we call them, which are the original Wing Chun sets, but we call them the Zhongfang sets. He wrote, Sifu No Santo wrote 10 JKD sets. JKD is shorthand for Jeet Kune Do. And that was to distinguish them from the Zhongfang sets. So the JKD sets are, while inspired by the original 108 movements of the Wooden Man, you'll see some echoes there as we go along, are really new creations unto themselves. Bruce Lee wasn't that fired up about them when Sifu Dan put them together. He goes, yeah, if you want to put that together, that's fine. I think you should just freestyle. But Sifu Dan knew that Sifu Bruce was a genius and could make associations almost immediately, whereas students needed some repetition. So he thought it would be useful to create some drills that he calls the JKD sets. Now, Sifu Dan No Santo has produced a lot of content in his time in a lot of different martial arts systems. Interestingly enough, if you were to approach him at a seminar and ask him, hey, Sifu, can you show me something from JKD dummy set number 6? He's likely to say, nope, because he doesn't remember them very well anymore. He practices almost completely on his own freestyle on the dummy, very much in the spirit of Bruce Lee. So he wrote them, and a lot of us have trained in them and have written them down and memorized them to one degree or another. But these aren't carved in stone. You know, you're not violating some rule of orthodoxy if you take these and you morph them and change them and do different things with them that you want. Which brings us to another point I want to make. You're going to run into people as you're training on the dummy who will say, you're doing it wrong. And they might be right. You might be doing it wrong. You might be doing it in a way that's dangerous or isn't really achieving what you want to achieve with the technique that you're using. But one thing I've learned in my going on 50 years in the martial arts, 5-0, next year it'll be 50 years, is that if you gather 100 instructors of the same style in the same room, you'll get very few of them to agree with each other on the basics. It's hard to get two Filipino martial arts instructors to agree on how to hold a knife. It's hard to get two boxing coaches who have each produced world champions to agree on the proper way to throw a left jab. This tells me that there's a whole lot of truth out there that conflicts with a whole lot of other truth. Different folks teach differently and have their own programs. I think this is what makes martial arts really fascinating to study. So anyway, if someone tells you you're doing it wrong, be respectful, listen to what they have to say. You just might learn something, but don't necessarily assume that whoever else showed it to you was wrong. They may not do it the way this other gentleman's instructor did it, but there may be a good reason. Because of this, a lot of people in the Wing Chun community consider the JKD sets to not be legitimate. Well, they aren't Wing Chun. That's not what they are. They're not Wing Chun Kung Fu. They are Junfan Gongfu, which is a different system, which draws inspiration from Wing Chun, but is not limited by it. So make of that what you will. In the final analysis, our goal is to become like Sifu Bruce and Sifu Dan. That is, to eventually get to a point where we freestyle on the dummy, like a musician, improvising, jamming, and not be stuck to just sets. The sets are very useful to learn your movements, but eventually you should just play with it like a boxer playing with a heavy bag. That takes care of what I wanted to tell you today. Next time, be warmed up and ready to go. We're going to do some technique.